Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Statistics Solutions Chapter 1 webinar. Before we get started, just a couple things. I want to just encourage you, if you like what you hear today, or just in general, to go to our website. Here's some contact information for you. Let me scroll down to that. And just see if, scheduling an appointment that you can find out more about what we do. We're a full service dissertation service, editing, helping you develop your ideas, your chapters so they get approved. We help with statistics. So, a call would with somebody would give you even more information about what we offer. So we encourage you to do that. Also, right now, our co-host is putting on in the chat where you can information about getting this webinar sent to you. Also information about scheduling a consultation. Also information about this webinar and other webinars of ours are archived on the website. Also on the website, we have blogs, we have chapter guidelines. So we have all kinds of information and resources on the website, as well as, schedule for other webinars. We do offer other webinars besides just chapter 1. We offer webinars on all the chapters, and webinars on methods and different aspects of the dissertation and the dissertation process. So, okay. So one more thing, if you have questions as we go along, which is absolutely fine, because at the end, we're going to have a question session where I try to answer your questions. If you have a question as we go along, that's fine. Just if you want to write it down, or you can even type it in the question and answer box, that's fine, so you don't forget it. But I won't get to them until the end. Okay. All right, so the chapter 1. Let's just kind of pull back a minute. So we can, talk a little bit about the purpose of the chapter 1 and how it fits into the, the overall study. So the chapter 1 is typically the introduction, and what we typically see as far as dissertation structure and what we kind of model our general template on is the 5-chapter model. Now there are other models, but the 5-chapter model seems to be pretty standard, where chapter 1 is the introduction, chapter 2 is the literature review, chapter 3 discusses the methods, chapter 4 presents your results, and chapter 5 is your discussion of the results. So chapter 1 is as the introduction to the study. If you think of the chapter like a blueprint, right, it's going to talk about 3 fundamental things, 3 fundamental areas: the what, why, and the how. Okay, so the what, your topic, what your study is about; why, why you're conducting the study, why it's important, what's driving the need for the study; and a little bit about how. That's, how you're going to conduct your study, the methods that you're going to use to collect the information that you're looking to get. Now, the methods will be elaborated upon in much more detail in chapter 3 later on, but usually in chapter 1 there's some mention of the methods. There's definitely usually mention of the research questions. Sometimes there's some section called nature of the study, or somewhere where you kind of rationalize. You talk about the method you're going to employ, and you kind of give some reasons for why you're using the design that you are. So the what, why, and the how, that's what chapter 1 covers, right? So again, it's kind of a blueprint. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what my topic is. Here's why I'm doing it. And here's how I'm going to do it. Okay. And usually the all right. Okay. Here are the contents that we're going to cover, and they're pretty typical for chapter 1. Now, you're going to hear me say this several times throughout the presentation, but always, if you haven't already, Obtain your school's template, because now while there are, commonalities in the features of the chapter 1 and all the chapters, some schools may have some, particulars that they want. The headers may be in a different order, or they may call their headers something else. But always get your school's template, because that will be your guideline, right, for what you need to include in the chapters. It usually also gives you information about what goes in, guidance about what goes into these sections. But what we have is a general template, and it's pretty standard. But again, details will sometimes be a little different from school to school. Okay, so the introduction, and if you take each section, one at a time, you should be okay, rather than, thinking of it all like as a total chapter and you have to get it all down at one time. Take each section and do what's required for each section, because they kind of build on one another. All right, so this is where you basically, your introduction, you're introducing your topic, and why you're conducting your study and how you're going to conduct it. So at the end of this section, the reader should have an idea of what your study is about, why you're conducting it, and how you're going to conduct it. Now, all these details, of course, are going to get fleshed out later in the chapter, right? So this is just the introduction to it. Usually studies are designed to address some kind of social problem, right? If there was no problem, there would be no need to do a study. We don't do studies just kind of for fun. We conduct studies to get information to address something that's an issue or a problem. So usually studies proceed from social problems or organizational problems. So you want to get the reader's attention by drawing their attention to what is the social problem that you're looking at? What is the organizational problem you're looking at? Maybe it's that attrition in special education teachers, right? We have a lot of special education teachers leaving the field, right? That's a problem, right? That's an educational problem. So you then would you would then bring in your topic by bringing attention to the reader of that problem. Use statistics, right? About the number or the percentage of special education teachers who left the field recently. So use some kind of statistic, or even a cited, a source, to put the problem that you're looking at into perspective, right? To show the scope of it, to show that it is a problem. Get the reader's attention with that. If you use statistics or whatever, if you use a source, make sure it's recent, right? Because if you use a source from 12 years ago, the problem may be solved. It may not be a problem anymore, but almost certainly it's changed, right? I mean, if you quote numbers from 12 years ago, the numbers today are going to be different. So use a recent source, use a recent statistic for that. Introduce the research problem too. So it's not just a social problem, right? We have special education teachers leaving at record numbers. But what is the research problem too, right? Because that's part of what's going to be driving your study. What do we know about research in this field already, and what don't we know? So you're going to want to include that in the introduction too. That's going to, you mentioned your research problem. You're going to dig into that later and flesh it out more. But again, this is the introduction. You're going to mention it. What research is needed to address that gap or that research problem? Why is your study needed? These things need to be made clear at the very beginning. Okay, right. State what is needed to address the research problem. How is your study designed to address the research problem? And again, at the end of the section, this is not a long section, right? You're just kind of putting the material out there, and your reader knows that you're going to, fill in the blanks and connect the dots later throughout the chapter. But at the end of the section, your reader should know what you're studying and why. And this isn't long, maybe a page. maybe a little less than a page. And if you want, you can end with a preview of the sections that are to come in the chapter. And again, if check your template to see if it requires anything different, but that's pretty typical for the introduction. Okay, next comes the background. And this is, think of the background as, you know, your reader doesn't know about your topic. They don't know about the issue. They don't know about the research that's been done in the area. So you have to catch them up, right? You have to catch the reader up on the topic and the research, you know, where the topic has been, you know, what's changed, where is it now, as well as the research on the topic. You know, where's the research been? What are the major trends in the research? Where does the research stand now? And usually if you think of the shape, you can kind of conceive of the background as a funnel, right? It kind of starts general and then it's going to kind of taper to point to your specific, what you're doing, right? Your specific problem that you're looking at. So it's going to include some historical material, right? And you don't need to get like really detailed in studies here, but you do need to like hit some major research along the way, right? So you're talking about the topic. Where has this, you know, this issue of special education teachers leaving the field? When did it start? You know, what were the ups and downs in it? What are the currents in the problem? But it's also about the research too, not just the problem itself. What research has been done on the topic? What is some of the traditional research? What are the trends in the research? Where do we stand now as far as where the research is, right? Because that's going to lead you to what you're doing, right? So you should be, by showing what's been done on the topic, you should also highlight what has not been done and hence the need for your study. Okay, so it ends with where research stands on the topic and the gap or the need for your study, right? Which takes us directly into the research problem section. And just to back up for a minute, the background section, it may be a few pages, right? Because you're going to have to hit, you know, quite a bit of material. But again, it's kind of a summary of sorts. You know, you don't have to get you know, really in depth about all the studies, but you do want to hit, you know, when they were, what they contributed, you know, the findings. But it could be a few pages, the background. Leads into the research problem. Now, this is a more targeted discussion of what your actual research problem is, right? So it transitions from the background. Research in this section should be pretty recent because you're framing the current problem, right? The current research problem. And to do that, you know, you might need to throw a traditional or a foundational study in there, but it mostly should be current research. And what is a research problem? Let me just back up for a second here, because sometimes we're not always on the same page about what a research problem is. A research problem it's just like it sounds. It's a problem in the research. What does that mean? It means that there's some kind of inconclusiveness on the topic in the research. There's something that's not quite worked out yet. There's something we don't know. You know, whatever kind of issue it is, it could be, you know, on the topic that we're looking at, there could be a lot of quantitative research. We have tons of statistics, tons of numbers on this topic, but we really don't have much qualitative research that digs deep and gets past the numbers and looks at people's experiences. You know, that could be a kind of research problem. So hence, you know, your study is designed to address that by, you know, you're conducting a qualitative study, or it could be the reverse. We have lots of qualitative research and we don't have much, you know, quantitative research confirming, you know, the relationship between factors or something. So the research problem can be, you know, a different type of problem. Sometimes it's a gap in the research, And a lot of people seem to gravitate toward this one because it's easier to kind of understand and identify. But it's a gap in knowledge in the research. It's a type of research problem. It's not the only type, but it's a type. That means that we're lacking information on some aspect of the topic, and that's a legitimate research problem. And your study therefore would be designed to get that information that we're lacking. Okay, so the research problem section, then it kind of sets that up, right? So and part of what you're doing here is, again, framing your research problem by what's out there, right? Because in the recent research that's out there on the topic, and in doing that, you're going to highlight what's not there or what's still needed, right? Let's just take an example real quick of, let's just say your research problem is a gap in the literature. Well, if it's a gap, how do you describe it? You see what I mean? A gap is something that doesn't exist, right? By definition, a gap is an absence of something. So how do you describe your research problem if it's, an absence of information? And the way you do that, and this is an analogy that I heard that I think works, is say you have a donut, right? Donut hole. How do you describe the donut hole to somebody? It doesn't exist, right? There's nothing there. So the thing is, what you do is you describe the donut, right? And in describing the donut, you frame the absence, the middle. And the same kind of analogy, I think, works for the research problem. How do you describe the gap in the literature? You can say it, but you have to. Your professor's not going to be happy with you saying, "Hey, there's a gap in the literature on this topic." They're going to say, "Well, how do you know what research has been conducted around it?" And that's what you want to do here, is you want to talk about the research that's been conducted close to it, right? The research on the topic that is especially relevant, but it hasn't kind of targeted what you're going to target. So that's what this research problem section is about. Stating what the research problem is, talking about the research that frames it, and highlighting what's still not in the research, and hence the need for your study. Okay, and this section usually isn't too long. Again, check your school's templates, but I'd say less than a page, but it needs to be really kind of targeted, right? All right. The purpose section. Again, this is a fairly short section, but the purpose section contains the purpose statement. And the thing about the purpose statement, it's usually has a specific construction, and I have examples here. So the purpose statement, usually the purpose statement begins the purpose section. Okay, so the purpose statement reads something like this: the purpose of this approach, design, study is to examine or explore, whatever verb you decide, the variables or concept in whatever your sample and whatever your setting is. So let's look at some examples. For a quantitative example, the purpose of this quantitative correlational, that's approach design, study is to examine. The verbs are not so important. I typically use for quantitative studies, verbs like examine or investigate. For qualitative studies that tend to be more exploratory, I use explore, but the verbs aren't so important. The other components are. The variables or concepts, right? In this case, the purpose of this quantitative correlational study is to examine the relationship between transformational leadership and emotional intelligence. Those are your variables and then whatever sample in middle managers and businesses in the Northeast. Okay, your sample and your setting, and that's it. That's the construction of the purpose statement. It's usually pretty pat that way. We have a qualitative example. It really follows the same pattern. I use the term the verb explore instead of examine. And here's the thing with the purpose statement, right? I mean, the purpose statement is basically what you're doing in your study in a nutshell, right? So I mean obviously there's a lot more to your study, but that talks about, it gets everything that you're looking at, right? And so because it is kind of a representation, like a, of exactly what you're doing, when you mention your purpose statement anywhere in your document, it needs to stay the same. And this goes for your research questions too. Now, I mean, as you're working on your dissertation and things are still early, your purpose may change a little bit if you haven't got, your everything all nailed down yet. But once you get it nailed down, and you're like, yes, this is what I'm doing, the purpose statement, if you have to mention it anywhere else, just restate it verbatim. It doesn't change. Okay. Don't think like, I got to restate this because it sounds too repetitious, right? No, you don't want to change it, right? Stays the same. Same with your research questions. But that's the only time you got to pass in kind of copy and pasting material. They don't want you to, the professors usually, if it's something else, like a pull section from a pull material from a section and put it in another place, they don't like that. But with the purpose statement, you have to do it. Okay. The purpose statement begins the purpose section. The purpose section can also include things like specific information about your variables. There may be some definitions about your variables, identifying which one's the independent, which one's the dependent. They talk a little bit about your major concepts, or even mention the instruments that you're going to use. And again, this is not a long section. It's maybe a paragraph, maybe a couple. And another suggestion is if you haven't done this already, as well as getting your school's template, get an example of an approved dissertation from your school, because sometimes there's just no better resource than looking at a good example, right? Because you can go to webinars, you can talk to your colleagues, you can talk to your professors, and they tell you what to do, and then you sit down to write, and sometimes it's just the easiest to have like an example, a concrete example that you can look at to see what somebody else did. Okay, research questions. This is not a methodological webinar. It's not a methods webinar. So we're not going to go into how to develop research questions or any of that, but we do offer webinars on those things if you're interested. So check our schedule for that. But just to say that the research questions go here in the chapter 1. Next usually comes the theoretical framework or the conceptual framework. I suppose we have to talk a little bit first about what a conceptual and a theoretical framework are and the differences, and then talk about the section here. So what is a theoretical or conceptual framework? Basically, it's a theory or theories or a set of concepts that you're using to kind of guide your study, to guide your investigation, and it helps at the end in the discussion section to helps explain your findings, right? Because data itself is dumb, right? Data is moot, right? Data can't speak for itself. So the role of theories, or even concepts, if it's qualitative, help you explain the data and help you explain the differences or whatever you're looking at in the data. It also helps kind of guide your study. So let's just take well, before we get there, let's talk a little bit about the difference between a conceptual framework and a theoretical framework. I like to keep things simple and practical. Now we do have blogs. Let me see if I can post it here. Yeah. All right, we do have blogs on theoretical frameworks, on conceptual frameworks on our website, so check those out. And the one I just posted is talks about the differences between theoretical and conceptual frameworks. They have the same function. And like I said, I like to keep things simple and practical. which means theoretical frameworks are typically associated with quantitative studies. Conceptual frameworks are typically associated with qualitative studies. Okay, now why is that so? What's the difference between, why does it matter? And this is largely because theoretical frameworks, quantitative studies proceed deductively. Okay, that means they start from a theoretical premise, right? And then, the study is designed to measure specific data to see whether this theoretical premise, it applies to this basic theoretical premise, right? Qualitative studies work the opposite way. They're inductive, which means you're not starting from a general theoretical premise. You want to get, you're getting data from participants, usually through interviews. You want that information to kind of not necessarily speak for itself, but you don't want a theoretical overlay on that. You don't want a theory coming in and saying, here's what these participants are saying. You want the participants' voices and experiences to be heard on their own. And then you're going to draw conclusions from that specific information. So it's kind of like the reverse. With quantitative studies, you start off with the theory and you're going to see if, the specifics that you gather are appropriate for that theory. With qualitative, it's you don't have a theory because you don't want that theoretical overlay to tell you what their voices and their experiences already mean. So you want that meaning to come from the participants' words and their experiences. So that's kind of why theoretical is more suited to quantitative and conceptual is more suited to qualitative. Now, what are they? What does the section look like? Okay, so you probably want to start off just pretty pat by saying, identifying the theories that you're going to use. I'm a firm believer in not using anything that you don't need to use. So, in other words, if you can get away with one theory, perfect. Sometimes you might need two, maybe three, but you start getting more theories, piling on more theories, because I see people, they just think they need a lot of theories for some reason. You only need what you need. Because say you get 4 or 5 theories, you're going to have to explain every one. You're going to have to explain how each one of them connects to your study. You're going to have to talk about each one in the discussion chapter. So my idea is to keep things streamlined, right? If one theory works, fine. If it takes 2, it takes 2. But more than that, there should be a good reason. Okay. So let's take an example. Let's just say we're conducting a study on transformational leadership and emotional intelligence. So what would our theoretical framework look like? Well, the theories that we're going to be, it shouldn't be a guessing game, right? Well, gosh, what theories do I use for this? Well, you're going to use the theory of transformational leadership, and you're going to use theory of emotional intelligence, because that's what you're studying, right? And there are theories for those things. So that's what your framework is going to consist of, both of those theories, right? So what do you want to do? Start off by saying something like, so-and-so's theory of transformational leadership and so-and-so's theory of emotional intelligence will serve as a theoretical framework for this study. And then you would go into defining each one, right? Make sure, first thing, right off the bat, you have to define the theory. What is it? Talk about who developed it. What did they develop it for, right? Theories, what do theories do? Theories explain things. So talk a little bit about the person who developed it, what they developed it to explain. What have other researchers used it for, right? Have people used it in the same field that you're in or in different fields? Talk a little bit about generally how researchers have used it. You also want to talk how it connects to your study, how it's going to help you explain what you're doing, how it's going to help guide what you're doing. Those are kind of the main parts you want to hit in your theoretical framework. Now, for our example there, we had two, right? Two: transformational leadership and emotional intelligence. You talk about transformational leadership, then you talk about emotional intelligence in the same way. And together, those two things constitute the framework. If you need one theory, that's fine. If you need three, that's fine. But again, there should be a reason for that. About the theoretical framework as it relates to the quantitative study, here's another thing to keep in mind. Let's just take emotional intelligence, for example. There are different theories and different theorists and different instruments for emotional intelligence, right? So let's just say, there's several instruments to study it. You pick an instrument because the instrument that you chose is going to give you the information that you need, that you're looking for. So you choose, let's say, Goldman. He's a proponent of emotional intelligence. You use Goldman's instrument to measure emotional intelligence. Okay. Well, these instruments are based on theoretical foundations. They have theoretical foundations. I mean, they're not developed from nothing, right? They're developed from theoretical research. So when you talk about this theory of emotional intelligence and theoretical framework, excuse me, you're going to use Goldman's theory, right? Because you're using Goldman's instrument. So you don't want to use Goldman's instrument and talk about somebody else's theory, right? Because these theories they're going to have differences. The instruments have differences. Goldman's instrument might study, 3 components of emotional intelligence, but somebody else's instrument might have 6 components. They define it differently. So you see what I'm saying? So if you're using somebody's, whoever's instrument you're using for your study, make sure that your theory corresponds to the instrument, right? So it's Goldman's theory, Goldman's instrument. Okay. For the conceptual framework, what's different here? We haven't talked much about the conceptual framework yet. It's very similar, except that you're not using full-blown theories, because again, you don't want this kind of like theoretical overlay to tell you what to think before you've even heard what participants say, right? You want their word. You're going to make sense of their words. You're going to make conclusions based on their experiences and their words and what they say. You don't want a theory coming in. So you're going to use concepts here and not theories. So if you're studying, let's just say, how African-American women advance to, upper executive positions in education or in companies or something, you would want to then, for your conceptual framework, probably use something like, the concept of career advancement or, career barriers or something like that. It's a concept taken from the literature that you're looking at. And everything is the way you set it up, much the same way as a theoretical framework, except it's not a theory. Okay, I see we have some questions here. I'll get to them at the end. Okay, nature of the study. Again, this isn't a methods webinar, so we're not going to talk much about this, but we do, again, if you're interested in developing research questions, developing these kind of methods sections, we do offer methods webinars. So check our schedule on that, our webinar schedule. But here basically usually have the rationale for the design. You talk about the design, right? Your approach is going to be quantitative. Your design is going to be correlational. Why are you going to use a correlational design? Because it's the best way to measure the relationship between two variables. So that's what kind of is going on in this section. You might summarize your methodology, including, who you're going to collect data from, how you're going to collect data, how it's going to be analyzed. Okay. All right, definitions section, check your, most schools have a section for this on definitions. And these are definitions of major concepts, the terms, your variables that are important to your study, right? That you're going to be studying. Definitely your variables or your factors, if it's qualitative, the major concepts, maybe the theory. And you do it in this definition section. Now, other than the definitions themselves, the only really text you need is something like the following terms are defined for use in the study, period. And then you can go on with your definitions. Sequence them alphabetically, right? Don't just sequence them randomly because your professor is going to come along and say, put these in alphabetical order. So sequence them alphabetically. Again, define major concepts using your study. I always suggest putting definitions in the form of sentences. Different schools have different requirements. Some schools they don't care. Some schools want them in the form of sentences. I just say put them in the form of sentences so nobody comes back and, instead of phrases, so nobody comes back and says, hey, put these in the form of sentences. I just do it from the beginning. Definitions should be clear and succinct. This is important because these are definitions, right? They're not discussions. I see people sometimes going, oh, Smith defines emotional intelligence this way, but Goleman defines it this way, and there's no universal definition of emotional intelligence. Stop. Okay, it's not a discussion, right? If you're using, again, Goleman's theory or Goleman's questionnaire, you want Goleman's definition of emotional intelligence. So they're not discussions. They're succinct. They're how you're going to use the term in your study, right? So usually a sentence, you can do it in a sentence, maybe 2 sentences, and they should all be supported with a peer-reviewed source. Okay. And under no circumstances use dictionary definitions. Dictionary definitions are too general, right? These terms are specific to the literature that you're talking about. They're also going to be specific to your study. You're going to be looking at this, term in a very specific way. So no general dictionary definitions. Sources should be recent when possible. That's not so important here, but I mean, my guidance here is that throughout the whole study, things should be as recent as possible, right? Because remember, this is a study happening now. And unless something is foundational, and there is foundational material out there, that's kind of foundational to understanding the topic, it's okay to include foundational stuff, but you don't want a lot of material from 10, 20, 15 years ago. You want most of your material to be recent. Okay, so that's definitions. Let's see, significance. Professors like to call this section the so what section. And they're being a little glib, but also, I mean, it's correct in the sense that, okay, you're doing a study on special education teachers leaving the field. So what? The idea here is to get you to think about the value of your study or the value of the information that you're going to get, right? So, and usually information has value in 2 different areas. Value for research and value for practice, right? So usually this section, you can kind of divide it into 2 subsections. How might the information that you get contribute to research in the field? You need to think about that. Because, you're not just, I know you're doing it to get through, but also ideally, studies should be making contributions. And you need to think about the contribution that your study is going to make, the information that you gather. How is that going to contribute to research? How's it going to move it forward? How it might have the potential to change the way we think about the topic, or it might say, hey, we need to approach this topic in another way than we have traditionally been, or, it could, It's something, you know, there's some kind of contribution or some kind of way to advance the research. You need to think about that. And the same goes for practice. Sometimes practice is a little easier because this is about the value that your information might have to people, you know, at the level of practice who are doing, you know, what they're doing related to the topic. So if it's education, you know, our study on special education teachers leaving the field, well, who would that be valuable to? Like, if you got that information, who do you think that information would be valuable to? Obviously teachers, but I think administrators, right? Educational administrators, principals, supers, you know, so they can make decisions about, you know, maybe they need better pay, maybe they need more professional development, maybe they need more support. You know, administrators are in positions to, you know, that's what they do. You know, they help with those things, or maybe it could have something to do with hiring and retention and recruitment. So think about the value that your information that you're going to get from your study has for people at the level of practice. And that's what they want you to discuss that a little bit in this section too. All right. Other section, I've kind of smushed these together. Some schools have them, some schools don't, some schools have some of them, but usually at some point they're going to want you to talk about limitations. And this is, it's potential weaknesses or shortcomings that may affect your results. Now, you're not sure what's going to be a limitation yet. This is kind of forward looking. But say, you know, you have a population that's kind of maybe a risky population or something. You know, you may not be able to get access to them. That could be a limitation. And in that case, you might need to use like a proxy sample. You know, with COVID, we've been through COVID, so that created a lot of research, you know, limitations. But anything that might get in the way and might affect your findings, you want to talk about a little bit. Assumptions, these are things that you just have to assume because you don't have control over them. And the big assumption is that you have to assume that people are going to answer honestly, and to the best of their ability, right? You can't control what they say. So you just have to assume that they're going to give you honest information. But there are ways to help ensure that, and that's to ensure them of the anonymity and the confidentiality of their identities and of their responses. That helps ensure them, and that helps them to answer honestly because, you know, it's confidential and anonymous. Scope, sometimes called delimitations. This is really just kind of the boundaries of your study. It's going to sound a lot like the purpose. These are limitations or delimitations that you're going to put on your study, right? You know, if you look through a scope or binoculars, you know, you have the part that the vision, things you can see, and then around is the block, you know. It's like a frame, right? It's like framing your study. Here's everything my study is going to include. And again, it sounds kind of like your purpose. You're going to restate your participants, your setting. Sometimes it's helpful, you know, let's say like in an education study, you know, if you're just looking at, let's just say you're going to be studying parents, you know, parents' reactions to something or something about parents. In an education study, you know, you want to frame that. It's just going to be about parents. It's not going to be about students. It's not going to be about teachers or administrators. So that's what they mean by the scope of the delimitations. Okay, and at the end is a summary, and it's just like other summaries, right? You recap major points, right? So you're going to recap major points of the chapter. I would also remind the reader of the research problem and why your study is needed. And you can end by transitioning to the next chapter. But again, if your template calls for things other than that, or in addition to that, add those as well. Okay. Now this is who we are. This is our contact information. So I'm going to leave that up while I try to answer your questions. Okay, so we have a few. What about a scoping review? Does it require theoretical or conceptual framework? A scoping review, I'm not quite sure. We don't see a lot of those. So I'm not sure whether a theoretical framework or a conceptual framework would be more appropriate. Yeah, so I'm going to hold off on answering that one because I can't answer it with any degree of certainty. But I can, if you email me, I'll try to look that up and I can give you an answer to that. How do we develop research questions? This is not a methods webinar, but we do have methods webinars that deal with things like that. I mean, the research questions basically are, they drive what you want to find out. And, methods folks are better at framing than I am. I'm not a methods person. Because they're more used to the kind of the construction of the language. So I'm just gonna say hit one of our methods seminars for this one. Okay. If you have 4 different aims with 4 different experimental methods, are we saying that each of these would have its own theoretical framework to describe? No, I don't, not necessarily. Or possibly. I mean, it's hard to say for sure without seeing it. I mean, if the aims are different, but the phenomena is the same, you may be able to use, the same theory for multiple aims. But if they're different enough in the sense that they're looking at, something completely different, you might need separate. So I'm just going to say that one possibly. It really kind of depends. Please shed more light on the statement of problem. Okay, I went over that. What, anything specifically you want me to cover with the research problem? I mean, the research problem, it basically drives the whole study, right? It's the why of your study. Why is the study needed? Well, the study is needed because of this research problem. What's the research problem? Well, we don't have quantitative information on why special education teachers are leaving the field. Okay, so that's the need. That's why your study is needed, because we need qualitative information on why. We need to know why special education teachers are leaving the field. We need that qualitative information. That's the research problem. That's the need. That's what drives your study. And the research problem is developed by looking at the literature, or by seeing what's out there on the topic and consequently what's not out there, right? So the research problem, I hear people a lot say, well, I'm really interested in doing such and such, or I really think this is important. Or, I worked in this industry and I saw that this is really a problem. And all those are good starting places, right? But you can't end there for your research problem. Then you have to go to the literature and see, okay, what is on this topic that you're interested in, or this topic that you've seen as a problem in your personal experience or your professional experience. Go to the literature, see what the research says about it. And then you can start to develop a research problem based on your interests or based on your observations to see what's been conducted, what the information we have, the information we still need to get. So that's kind of, overview of the research problem. It drives the study. It's the issue, or it's the information that we need to get that we're lacking in the research, or it's a different take on the topic that's more typical in the research. So in other words, it's what makes your study unique, right? Because your studies have to be unique. You just don't want to conduct some research that we already know the answer to, right? So something needs to make your study unique, and that's developed in the research problem. Okay, what is the difference between the statement of problem and the statement of purpose? Well, the statement of problem is the research problem. The research problem is that we don't have enough qualitative research on why special education teachers leave the field. Okay, The purpose is more of what you're doing, not necessarily why, right? But what you're doing. The purpose of this quantitative correlational study is to examine the relationship. So to use the same example that I just used with the research problem, we need more qualitative research on why special education teachers need the field. Your purpose statement for something like that would read, the purpose of this qualitative study is to explore the reasons why special education teachers leave the field. Now they're related and they need to align, but they have different, there's a different focus and a different construction. Is it appropriate to use only theoretical framework for mixed methods research? Yeah, mixed methods, this is another one where it kind of depends on the study, right? So for mixed methods, you have a quantitative portion, you have a qualitative portion. It may be that you need a theoretical framework and a conceptual framework, or it may be that you only need one. It kind of depends. Sometimes mixed methods, what I see a lot is sometimes mixed methods are mostly quantitative, and they'll have a little qualitative portion just to help explain the quantitative results, or vice versa. It'll be mostly qualitative, and they'll have a few quantitative questions to help clarify some points. If that's the case where it's weighted one way or the other, you could probably get away with either a theoretical framework or a conceptual framework, whatever, whichever way the study is weighted. If they seem to be kind of equally weighted, like they have equal role in the study, you may need both. But again, that's another one where, talk to your chair. It's kind of dependent on the study, the individual study. Is the background section kind of a summary to the literature while also pointing out our specific problem? Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. It is kind of a summary of the research on the topic, on the problem, and kind of a targeted summary, right? Because you're not going to hit everything, but you're going to hit like the major trends, the major research. So yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's kind of like a summary, and points and right, and with an eye toward pointing out the specific problem. Right. Okay, let's see. All right, I think I got all the questions. Any more? And I'll give you a second. Any other questions? All right, and I do, again, let me put this back up. Oops, there's our, yeah, make a consult if you want. It's free, no obligation. It'll just give you more information about what we offer and our services and prices and things like that. And use the website. The website's free. We have resources there. We have blogs. We archive the webinars. There's methods webinars. So take a look. Great. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And we have other ones. So see what we're offering. See if that's, other webinars you want to go to. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.